Welcome to the Normalized Surrogacy podcast with Surrogacy Mentor. I'm your host, Carrie Flamer Powell, and I'm joined today by my sidekick and intake manager, Marielle. Hello. It's been a while since we've done a podcast together, so this is fun. So today we're just kind of winging it and talking about a topic that has recently come up in screening and comes up quite a bit in screening surrogates. So that is the topic of government assistance for surrogate candidates and why we and agencies cannot accept surrogates who are on forms of government assistance. So let's sort of start out with kind of a broad definition of what we're talking about here, and then we'll dig into kind of a scenario that came up recently, obviously not identifying anybody. But, let's kind of talk about it. And for purposes of this podcast, I'm going to obviously represent the professional, ethical side of why these guidelines and ethics exist. And Marielle is going to sort of play devil's advocate of, surrogates that ask quite often why, or surrogate candidates, surrogate applicants that ask quite often, why can't I be a surrogate if I'm on government assistance? What's the reason? So in general, there is a guideline and an ethical standard that's out there that agencies and anyone who's doing any kind of recruiting of surrogates, matching of surrogates, is not supposed to accept a candidate who relies on certain forms of government assistance. And I believe this is also outlined in the ASRM guidelines, the American Society for Reproductive Medicine guidelines for gestational surrogates. Don't quote me on that because I didn't pull it up before our chat, but I believe it's also in there. So in general, the guideline, and it can vary from agency to agency a little bit, but essentially what the guideline says is if the surrogate relies on government assistance in the form of cash assistance or rent subsidies or any kind of direct cash supplement like SNAP, food stamps, etc., then she is not in a quote unquote financially stable situation where entering into surrogacy would be in her best interest. And there's a multitude of reasons for that, which we will talk about here in a second. But the short version is that it is there to protect the surrogate and the intended parents, but mostly the surrogate and her family. So why don't we just give some generals, not using exact figures that match up to any particular person, and obviously no identifying information. But why don't you tell us, Marielle, like a recent or a general situation that comes up in your screening of surrogates that you hear from people who are applying to be surrogates?
Yeah, so a lot of times when we see applications come through, we see a lot of women who are getting state insurance through there is one that we see commonly. We see the SNAP benefits come through a lot. WIC is a common one that we see come through. More rarely do we see, housing subsidies and things like that, but those do kind of come through. And when we see that, obviously, that's one of the big questions we ask during our intake is, talk to me a little bit about that. How much are you getting from that? And a lot of women don't understand why they would need to stop that in order to qualify for surrogacy. They don't kind of see the link between getting any of that and starting a surrogacy process. And they just kind of want to know why they have to stop and when they would have to stop. And they don't quite understand why and don't necessarily feel like it's fair.
So I want to dig into each of those kinds of benefits and why surrogacy agencies and people like Surrogacy Mentor do not accept applicants. But I want to sort of give more of a general understanding for the listeners or viewers that when we are looking at a surrogate application and a surrogate's overall scenario situation, we are looking in general for general overall stability, right? Because surrogacy is such a massive undertaking physically, emotionally, mentally, logistically. It affects your entire life. It affects your entire immediate family. I've been a surrogate. Marielle has been a surrogate 3 times. We know how much time and effort and emotional energy and physical, obviously, energy it takes to undergo even just the screening to be a surrogate, right?
Yeah.
So we are looking for someone who is at a point in their life where they are overall stable. We're not looking for perfection, obviously. We're looking for, is this person at a point in their life, in their relationship, in their finances, in their physical health, in the formation and completion of their own family, all the things. Are they in a place in their life where they can approach this surrogacy journey from a healthy and stable place, right? And that is not an easy equation to formulate. It is made up of, what does their relationship look like? Did they just go through a divorce? Is their divorce even final yet? Because that presents legal complications, right? And emotional complications. Are they done forming their family? That presents an issue if you want to have children, more children of your own in the future, and maybe something happens during the surrogacy that you have to get a hysterectomy and now you can't carry any more children, right? So we're looking at each little piece and we're saying, okay, she looks stable in her relationship. She's done forming her family. She doesn't have any legal entanglements. Okay, wait, she gets state or government benefits for her family. So now we need to look at her financial situation a little more careful. So we're not looking at a financial situation and saying, does she have hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank? And does she own a home and a car? And does she have an amazing job that pays her $200,000 a year? Of course, we're not looking for like this like financially wealthy scenario. Though surrogates come in all shapes and sizes financially, right? I've had surrogates with PhDs and $200,000-$300,000 a year jobs. I've also had surrogates with a high school diploma working for $20 an hour. So that is not something we are looking for perfection on. What we are looking for is, if you did not have the surrogacy income to look forward to or to depend on, could you still be financially stable? Not financially wealthy. Could you be financially stable? Do you have a consistent source of income or financial support from your spouse or partner? Do you have no active bankruptcies? Are you in a situation where this isn't going to put your family in danger or in danger of financial issues if you can't rely on the income? Okay, so that's overall what we're looking at. So finances is just a piece of it. So now let's talk about specific types of benefits that you mentioned and why some of them are actually okay and some of them are not. So you mentioned state insurance. So a lot of people from COVID, especially the COVID period, but just a lot of people in general have their kids on a state health insurance plan because it just makes more sense financially. Even if their family has 2 incomes, they may still qualify for their state health insurance plan that is better coverage at no or very low cost for their kids. And it doesn't make financial sense for them to have them on any other plan. Most agencies, and including Surrogacy Mentor, will accept a candidate if her only form of assistance is her kids are on state health insurance, because we know that the threshold for qualifying for that is really actually quite high. So that one isn't as much of an issue, right? The ones where it gets sticky, and I know we've had some recent issues with this, with applicants with this, where it gets sticky is when you have a family that, or a single mom who's relying on things like food stamps or SNAP benefits to the tune of $500, $600, $700 a month. And she's literally relying on that benefit every month to feed her family. So let's talk a little bit about that. And you tell me, what have you heard from surrogates who are on food stamps or SNAP? What are they saying to you about that benefit, and what are their questions around it?
So a lot of them really just don't understand why they have to come off of it in general, or why they can't stay on it until they start getting those big surrogacy payments. Why do I have to stop it beforehand? Why can't I do this? I had a recent conversation where, I had a mom who, as a stay-at-home mom, it would cost her money to go back to work. So she's at home with her kiddos, just kind of having a rough go. And she stumbled upon surrogacy and really was looking at this as like, wow, this could be it. This could be the thing to kind of help pull us out of our financial situation, right? I could be home with my kids. I could be doing something great while, bringing in income. And then, I had a conversation with her about that, her needing to be able to feel comfortable coming off of that and being off of that without any income from surrogacy and any income from the state. How long, does she think she can do that? And she couldn't. And, she really just kind of felt like it was unfair. And she was just kind of crushed that she really thought that she found this amazing way to help her family and somebody else, but couldn't, and just kind of felt stuck in, I want to get out of this situation and I can't, but this could help me, but I can't, because she just kind of felt just stuck. And I think that's a common thread I hear. Like, I never want to be the one who has to bring that reality to women who are wanting to do the right thing for themselves and for somebody else. But the reality does come down to those ethics. I think being able to explain that through, episodes like this is really great, so they have a better understanding of why it feels unfair.
Right. So I want to touch on a couple things you said. First of all, it never fails. As soon as I start recording a live podcast, someone starts cutting down a tree, or I don't know what they're doing out there, but if you can hear it, I apologize.
I haven't heard it on my end yet, so hopefully it won't.
Well, hopefully our listeners don't hear it either, because it never fails. Nobody wants to cut down a tree until I'm recording. Anyway, all right. So let's talk about one thing you said that stuck out to me, which is the surrogate said to you that surrogacy would be a great way for her to get out of her financial situation. That's a huge red flag, right? Because the fact that she's in a financial situation that she needs to get out of means that on a fundamental level, she is not in a place in her life where taking the risk of surrogacy is a good idea. And when I say the risk of surrogacy, here's what I mean. I mean a couple things. What I mean initially is I don't think that applicants realize that it takes months of proper screening. If an agency or someone like Surrogacy Mentor is doing your screening and they're doing it correctly and not rushing you through the system and cutting corners, they should be doing an extremely thorough job of screening financial, criminal, relationship, mental health, medical, all the things, right? That takes months, right? So you have to invest as a surrogate so much time and effort and energy just in the screening process. There is no money paid to a surrogate until she is, at the very minimum, signing legal. After she signs a legal contract, there are some situations where there's a legal signing bonus. There is no major money exchanged until she's physically pregnant. For me, that took a year. From the time I started until I was pregnant, it was a year, right? Yeah. As a surrogate. So if I was waiting for surrogacy income to pull me out of a situation and I had to wait a year and then I stopped my benefits, for that year. Do you think that I could feed my family for that year? No, right? So I want to make it clear that no agency, and definitely not us, would ever ask a surrogate candidate to come off of benefits to qualify. The question is always asked, if you had to stop your benefits today, would you be financially stable enough to continue? And that's when you mentioned you have heard from some surrogates, oh yeah, I only get like $25 a month right now. We do not rely on it. Or I only get $200 a month, but I'm just going to get disqualified next month anyway because I'm back at a job where I'm making enough money to not qualify anymore. Okay, those scenarios are situations where they're totally fine financially without it. They were planning on getting off of it and not being dependent upon it. That's very different than saying, actually, I get $900 or $1,000 a month to feed my family. And if I came off of that without being able to immediately replace that income, I would not be able to feed my family.
Yep.
Okay. So that's one thing that I want to clarify. The other thing that is really important here that I don't think, I'm sure surrogate applicants don't understand is that there is such thing as legal coercion in any contract process. And if you have a surrogate who has been promised by an agency or intended parents this huge number of dollars to be a surrogate, and maybe they've paid her like little bonuses along the way, and maybe they've paid her expenses up to a certain point, and then she gets to the point where she has to sign a legal contract. Part of that legal contract is saying that you weren't in any way coerced to sign this contract, right? If you are dependent upon government assistance to feed or shelter your family, and you are relying on surrogacy income to keep yourself above water financially, and someone has promised you that money, and you know that if that money doesn't come, you're in deep doo-doo financially, you've been financially coerced to a certain extent. And I'm sure all my lawyer friends can chime in and correct me here, but you can't with good conscience say that you haven't in some way been coerced. And we don't want, as surrogacy professionals, there to be any way that someone could construe that you as a surrogate had been financially coerced into this situation. Legally, there could be some complications that, God forbid, something happen, right? And let's say you get pregnant as a surrogate and you get that first base compensation payment, which is when the big chunks of your compensation come, is once you're pregnant. And then you get 1 month of compensation. Then you have a miscarriage. Guess what happens to your compensation? It stops.
That stops coming.
Right? What do? Now you have to wait multiple months, right? Now you have to wait multiple months until you can try again. Your body has to reset medically. The doctor may not even approve you to try again. If she or he does approve you to try again, it's going to be a minimum of a month or two before you can try again. There was a 6-month delay between my first and my second transfer for my surrogacy. If you were relying on that money and then it immediately stops, what are you going to do then?
Yep.
How much pressure would that put on you, your family, and your intended parents at that point, right? So I don't know if you saw this in the professionals group, but there was recently a post about a surrogate who was, I think, in an independent journey, who something happened. They didn't get to transfer as soon as they thought, or maybe they transferred, but basically the compensation didn't come because she didn't get pregnant or wasn't still pregnant, and she wanted the intended parents to loan her money to like carry her over until the compensation started coming in. And that is a very clear-cut case of this person was not financially stable enough in the beginning to start this process. And how messy could that get if there starts to be that situation where your surrogate can't sustain herself and her family while you're waiting for her to get pregnant
Yep.
with your baby. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on all of that?
I mean, like I said, I've seeing it from both sides, like I totally can understand where she was coming from, thinking this is great, this is gonna help me improve my situation, and it's like the perfect solution. I'm at home with my kids anyways. I can help grow a family for somebody else while staying home with my kids and really get that push out of my situation that I desperately need. I can't work because my kids are young and it's costing me too much. And so for her, she was really looking at it as like the perfect, like, solution to a lot of things. And she understood, in my explanations of why you see the human side of things, and then not every case is going to be like that where she's asking for a loan from her intended parents, but you have to, I think in one of our other episodes that one of our attorneys had said, you have to plan for every worst case scenario when it comes to surrogacy. That's what these lawyers do, is they have to really think that all ahead. Now, not every time does that worst case scenario happen, but you have to assume it might. And so we get it. And I think that is a hard part for me, just like as an intake coordinator, when you see somebody who really wants to do it for the right reasons and the impact that it could make on their family. But I always, just have to stress that this should be adding to your household, not be the only thing. And as wonderful as it would be to have that, it can't be your only form of income. It just can't.
Right.
And it's hard when you have to be the bearer of bad news, but it just brought, some interesting questions. Like, could she stay on it just a little bit longer to get closer to this? And is there any wiggle room? And I was like, there really isn't. I definitely felt for her in that moment. And
so you said something that I want to touch on, because it gave me an analogy that I think is important to help people conceptualize this. You said that they desperately want to do surrogacy they desperately want to get out of the financial situation that they're in. So I've been thinking a lot about relationships lately, and it made me think about, if you have a friend who's single, right? And she's telling you that she's looking for a relationship. And she says to you, I need a relationship because I desperately want to be with someone that makes me feel whole. I desperately need this in my life because I am not happy with where my life is, and I feel like a relationship will fix that. Would you consider that a red flag? Versus if she came to you and said, my life is really good. I feel whole within myself. I feel like my kids are good. I feel like I'm in a good place with my job, my whatever. I feel good. If I meet the right person, I would love for that to add to my life. And I would feel really good about opening myself up to that possibility, because I know I'm okay no matter what.
Yep.
Right? Obviously, we know which scenario is healthier when we think about it in terms of relationships, right?
Yep.
Just cut and paste in your brain surrogacy and financial stability into that analogy. And that's what we're looking at. And that's what we're talking about. If someone's coming to you and saying, I need surrogacy because I desperately need to get out of my financial situation, they are not in a position to come to surrogacy from a whole, stable, well place. They are not in it. Even if their heart's in the right place, they are not in it at the right time in their life for it to be a healthy situation for everyone involved. So hopefully that analogy highlights it for some people. There's something else that you said about, the benefits and could I stay on them a little longer? Again, we're never going to ask someone to come off of benefits. But what people also need to realize is, let's say you're getting benefits and you decide that you can get off of them on your own and that you'll be okay. As long as, in the back of your mind, you're like, as long as the surrogacy compensation comes in, maybe you're not being completely honest with the agency about this, right? So what you need to understand is that if you start getting compensation as a surrogate, that is going to disqualify you from qualifying for the benefits. So if
Yep.
something goes wrong and you need to then go back and reapply for the benefits, you may not qualify. Every state has different scenario of how you qualify, when you can qualify, what income has to be considered. So maybe you got 1 or 2 surrogacy payments. Now you've been disqualified for whatever reason from becoming a surrogate. Maybe you had a miscarriage or something happened medically where you are not qualified anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now surrogacy's out. Like, you tried, you got a couple surrogacy payments, but you tried and you can't continue. Well, now you got to
Yep.
claim the compensation that you got for that year. When you go to reapply, you might not qualify for another year. What are you going to do then if you
Yep.
weren't in a position to be okay without this?
And there are also, I have heard, well, what if I just don't tell my case manager who manages my benefits that I'm getting any income? And I will tell you that backfires in a totally different way, because if you are getting income that you're not declaring to your state benefit coordinator, whomever that is, will very likely make you ineligible for ever getting them again, because essentially that's fraud. And so if they happen to find these couple of payments without you telling them before you cancel, that can add a whole other slippery slope of you never being able to get them. And now you're kind of, both options are gone. And so there are
Yes.
some very, legitimate reasons as to why we have these rules, and totally get it. I'm talking to these women, and it can be hard because you want to be able to help everybody, and we just can't. And there are good reasons for it. And I just thought it could be a good time to kind of really explain the why in a
Yeah.
little bit more depth. Hopefully, it can bring a little bit more understanding to the why these things are the way that they are. And when it comes down to it, it's all about safe and ethical journeys. And sometimes there's a reason why people are unethical. Doing the ethical thing isn't always the easy thing, but it's the right thing, right? And that's what we have to remember.
Doing the ethical thing is often not the easy thing, but the thing that I think is important, and I'm going to say something that people aren't going to like, and then I'll soften it a little bit. So, even if your heart is in the right place, even if you have dreamt of being a surrogate your whole life, even if you look quote unquote perfect on paper to be a surrogate in all other areas, if you are not in a financial situation at this time in your life where you are qualifying to be a surrogate, you don't qualify to be a surrogate, and it's not meant to be. I know you might feel like it's meant to be, but it's not. That's the hard part. Here is the softening of that a little bit. There's a season for everything, right, in our life. And maybe this isn't the season in your life where surrogacy is right for you, but maybe in a year or two, you're in a totally different financial situation. Finances can change, right? It's not a fundamental, like, medical disqualification where there is nothing you could do to reverse this medical thing that disqualifies you from surrogacy. Finances can change in another year or 2 or 3. There's always going to be a need for surrogates, let me tell you. It is only increasing every year, the need for surrogates. So if you right now are not in a situation where financially you qualify, and next year or the year after you find yourself in a situation where you're pretty stable and things are better and you're not getting benefits anymore and you feel pretty good about where you're at, then you can reapply. And that might be the season in your life where it's time for surrogacy. But surrogacy is not a situation where you can be loosey-goosey with some of these requirements. And
Yep.
it is, as you mentioned, for first and foremost, the surrogate's protection, the protection of her and her family and their well-being, whether that's financially or otherwise. But it's also about protecting the parents, protecting the child, protecting everyone involved, because once you start sort of getting on that slippery slope of, well, okay, maybe this is okay to be lenient on, then, maybe it's okay to be lenient on this. And then you're in a horrible situation where I promise you, things will always come back around to become way more complicated than you ever thought when you start cutting corners in a surrogacy journey. And that's where agencies and Surrogacy Mentor and those of us in the industry who are entrusted with this side of the things, that's where we have to come in and make the hard decisions and have the hard conversations to say, look, we have been doing this for years. We have seen hundreds of matches and cases and journeys. We have done this ourselves. I'm telling you that this is not the right time. It is not a good idea. It might be a good idea in the future, but it's not right now. You're
Yep.
just going to have to trust me on this. And it's
Yep.
not what people want to hear, but the alternative I have seen play out time and time again in our industry, which is that people move forward despite red flags, despite knowing they're not really ready, despite knowing they're not really stable in one or more areas of their life. And it has turned out tragically. It has turned out legally complicated. It has turned out emotionally complicated. It has turned out financially complicated.
Yep.
It is not worth it. I promise
No.
you, it is not worth it.
No.
So, what I would say to surrogates, and maybe you could add your 2 cents to this as we wrap up this topic, is accept that the answer might be not right now. That doesn't mean not forever. It just means not right now. And we're always open to surrogate applicants coming back to us if they find themselves in a stable financial situation. And if everything else still looks great for their stability, that picture of stability in their life that I talked about in the beginning, if everything else still looks great and your financial situation has improved, like, let's do it. Absolutely.
Yep.
So it might just not be right now.
Yep. No, and that's exactly, how we have to put these things, and it was a good one to kind of talk on, because we are pro compensation. We are pro this could and should help your family meet your financial goals. Like, we're not here to say anything otherwise. That the two, I would say, don't have to be mutually exclusive. You can do something great for somebody while still benefiting yourself and your family. But the way I always put it in my calls is that it needs to be adding to what you've already got, not be the only thing that's coming in. There's enough pressure, as you kind of said, in a surrogacy journey in general. That is a lot. And then to have to put your entire family's financial and food and all of that pressure on that situation too, just that's not healthy for anybody either. And I think having you explain why that is or isn't ethical gave more clarity to the situation of why, that it's not just like a check on a box, like nope. Being able to get that clarity out there, I think, will at least help it make more sense. It may still suck for some women who see that and they're like, man, but at least you can understand it more as to why.
Well, and let me just be clear, it sucks for us too. It sucks for every agency out there, everyone that's in this professional side of surrogacy. The demand for surrogates versus how many parents there are waiting for a surrogate, there is nothing worse than having to say no to a surrogate application. I hate it. But we can't falter on our responsibility to uphold the standards and ethics that are in place to protect everybody. But trust me, that's why you see shady agencies out there who promise these huge numbers, financially, and rush people through the surrogacy screening process, and have their profile up the next day saying they're available when they haven't even screened them. It's because there is such a demand, and it is so hard to say no to an applicant. But if you're being told no, it's because you are in touch with an agency or a company that is actually upholding the standards and ethics that they're supposed to be. But trust me, it is not easy to say no to an application. On average, we have to say no to 95% of the applications we get. That sucks. That means for every 100 people, like, what is the math on that? It's like, what? We get how many that we can actually approve? It's not a lot. What is that, 5? I don't even know. I can't do math in my head right now, but it's a lot. Basically, you have to have a huge number of people interested to even get a few that trickle through and get approved. And so it is not something we want to do. We don't want to reject your application, but we will because it's best for everyone. So that being said, I would love to hear what our listeners think of this topic. So feel free to email us at hello@surrogacymentor.com. Let us know your thoughts, your questions. We can always do a follow-up to this episode if there's something that we missed or didn't cover. So I want to thank my co-host for this episode, Marielle, Intake Manager. Don't forget to visit us online to take our easy 2-minute quiz to see if you might qualify to be a surrogate. That's at surrogacymentor.com. And of course, you can always find back episodes of our podcast there as well. Thanks so much.